Spyro contains over 8 collectible types, all baked into the gem. The crystallized dragons constitutes the main goal of the game. However, the most common and influential collectible is the gem. Gems are scattered far and wide, rewarding exploration in a platforming-focused collectathon. Won't collecting an inordinate amount of gems become old and tiresome over time, though? Collecting the same old thing 1,000 times over? Well, surprisingly no. Gems are strewn across the land, out by their lonesome, in-bashable chests, flammable stoves, fire-resistant projectile tops, and a variety of enemies, each new element advocating for and arresting the player's attention. Couple the gem container variety with an emphasis on traversal and exploration, and we get a mechanic that, despite its repetitive nature and simplicity, doesn't succumb to the typical trials of tedium. The red and gray treasure chests are Spyro's most rudimentary embodiment of discouraging absent-mindedness, but serve as the solid foundation. While red chests can be broken by charging into or by blasting them with our fire breath, gray chests are fire resistant, so the only option is to bash them. Beyond the recognition of when to charge or when to hurl out our fire breath is a timed jump. Often these gem-spewing chests are placed near one another, advocating a more rhythmic-esque collecting sequence. The rhythm shifts gears when, instead of constantly moving through and over these chargeable, hoppable, and flammable chests, the player stands for a moment to belch multiple fire breaths to aim a spinning top right into another chest, or even those nasty egg thieves. To celebrate the execution of the nimble egg thief, who doesn't enjoy a good firework? The locked chests are mostly unlocked via a key, but in some cases where there are no keys, we'll blast it open with a nearby explosive barrel or with a cannon, blow it up with a firework, exhale our super flame, or run down ramps to supercharge it, sometimes even across the stage. Screw the containers, let's bake the gems straight into enemies that release a hearty meal of crunch to reward our insatiable vengeance. Enemies generally boil down to a trivial extermination via charging into or fire breathing without concern, but thankfully the variation of chests extends to enemies as well. Big enemies cannot be charged. Gray shielded or armored enemies are fire resistant, further reinforcing the importance of color first established by the gray fire resistant chests. The mix of big and gray can introduce a new strategy of knocking the enemy into the chasm below, shrinking enemies down to a manageable size using a shrink ray, or killing the jester who grew the big armored giants 3 sizes way too big. Even the gem spewing chest carries over in the form of aggressive enemies. Overall, gems can effectively be broken down into multiple collectible types, some more common than others, some more difficult to obtain than others, and not because of the challenge or platforming required to obtain these gems, but the physical act of collecting them. Gems are not some tossed-in collectible, but an entirely fleshed-out reward system designed around maintaining awareness and executing specific actions depending on the context and location of the gem. This creates an overall more mindful and less repetitive gameplay loop. Gems offer an additional layer of complexity and attentiveness that glues Spyro together.
Hey, Red. We're not gonna get away with this, are we?
Sybil Reisz idolized Red, driving Sybil down a path of jealousy, greed, and unbridled, unrequited love, and an irrational, foolish hope. Sybil wrought not only her own destruction, but that of the very idol she revered. Sybil's character and idolization theme provided such a complex and emotional backing to what pushed the Camerata to mistakenly mishandle the Transistor, caused Cloudbank's end of times, and induced the traumatic experience that Red and her nameless lover went through, the loss of a body and a voice.
Say something, will you? Oh no.
In other words, Sybil Reisz single-handedly set off the entirety of the game's events, yet our only interaction with her is when she's practically dead. Her character is not only subtly significant with real personal motivations and depth, but overall causes the Camerata to feel human. So how did Sybil's idolization of Red create such a ripple throughout Cloudbank? Sybil was, to quote Red's Encircle song dedicated to Sybil, Sybil watched Red from afar, orbiting her life and tracing her movements, but never finding a place in Red's life. Sybil was also floating between her camerata job of scouting out high-value targets for their cause and her infatuation with Red. Red was a perfect target, an additional point of view, another voice to add to the Transistor.
To give the people what they didn't know they wanted.
But Sybil didn't inform the camerata, but rather kept this high-value target information to herself. So when Red saw Sybil hurting, she tried to ease her, yet also knew it wasn't her responsibility. How much effort and reasoning can one expend to ward off such infatuation anyway? Nothing would stop Sybil from landing, and Red wasn't going to save her from this dangerous and degrading obsessiveness. In fact, Red couldn't. Sybil's desperation soon led to a destructive and depressive spiral, finally leading to revealing Red as a target to the other camerata. The motive was to gratify her desire of disposing of the man she viewed as blocking her path to Red's heart. Finding the correct time and place for the target to be alone was incredibly important and essential to the camerata's goal, as the transistor could only be removed from its cradle for so long. So, to advance and reaffirm her own selfish and destructive desires, Sybil informed the rest of the camerata that Red would be alone. And while the trace data reveals an 85% chance she falsified this claim, we all know that 15% lenience is generous, perhaps hinting at a lingering guilt within Sybil.
I'd say the rest is history, but that's not quite the case.
Sybil's plan somewhat worked. Sybil's competition for Red's love was not as absent as Sybil had hoped, but rather transferred to and trapped inside the transistor.
There. Together again. Sort of.
Still plenty able to communicate with Red. Perhaps more importantly, the camerata lost control of the process, now consuming the entirety of their city cloud bank and its inhabitants. Waiting for Red's return in a fit of obsessive insanity, Sybil remained at the Gold Bank Auditorium. When Red found her, she was 98% processed, now a distant sentience trapped in a puppet and lost to her shallow hopefulness.
Hello again, Sybil. You. Lost her damn mind.
Sybil was desperate, now distraught in a rambling deterioration of processed emotions and impulses. She hummed Red's "We All Become" song as she stood in anticipation. Partway through the battle, the Encircle song switches over to a processed version sung by Sybil Reisz herself. And by the end, she's crawling and suffering, crying out in pain.
She's finished. What now? Can't leave her like this.
Now 0% processed, exhibiting the 2% of what remains of her original body and mind. As Red put Sybil out of her misery, relief washed over Sybil, knowing she'd always be by Red's side.
Her trace. Hello again, Sybil. Your camerata.
And yet, despite the transistor housing her now a simulated trace,
There's these traces inside the transistor. Everyday people once upon a time, but now, well, not quite themselves. And they're trapped. No walls in there, mind you, it's just they're on their own. Listen close enough and maybe you can hear them. Some of them, I mean. The ones you know.
Hello again, Sybil.
a cruel final blow and fate. Sybil is unable to even talk to Red, just like all of the strangers we meet and absorb into the transistor that only our close transistor friend and lover can hear. Overall, Sybil Reisz was not just a dedicated fan of Red's, but idolized her. Sybil found her purpose in Red. She felt empty inside without her. She neglected her own well-being for an unrequited love. Red was all she could think about, to the point where her self-esteem and worth hinged on Red's very existence. Sybil wrought not only her own destruction out of jealousy, fear, greed, and desperation, but of the very idol she revered, someone just as flawed and human as her. Sybil Reisz's actions rippled throughout the entirety of Transistor. The Camerata themselves acted from complex motivations for the good of Cloudbank, even if their actions were
Wrong. In the traditional sense. In the contemporary sense.
Sybil submerged beneath the group as an additional layer. Sybil's instability was conveyed in an emotionally impactful way, tying deeply into her subtle significance and weaving the Camerata as a mysterious yet influential group of people more involved with Cloudbank and Red than one might initially perceive. Now it's time for late night ruminations. I can't help but wonder when Sonic will finally become a historical remnant forgotten by future generations. Sonic's 3 decades of blundering has amounted to horribly inconsistent quality that is often consumed just for the lulz. When will Sonic finally be laid to rest and remembered only in passing as a just okay series of games? And we all know there are a crap ton of them good old mediocre or awful titles. The 21-year-old Sonic Adventure is still a 3D Sonic high point in terms of level design, freedom of control, and a considerable amount of mechanical and level variation in each and every stage, despite the technical issues, not to mention the hilarious cutscenes.
Sonic, wait here for a second.
Sonic Adventure 2 doesn't have that hilarity, and by taking the opportunity to improve the overall speed for Sonic, the stages are more streamlined and the level design is often flat as a result. In addition, the new playstyle for Tails was a huge missed opportunity for that character. Before the adventure games, Sonic had an incredibly rocky start in the 3D space. Sonic 3D Blast and the oh my goodness this would have been hilarious if this actually released, Sonic Extreme. I also can't forget Sonic R, a game with crazy amounts of exploration for a racing game of all things, but with stiff controls, major balancing issues, and only a few stages. The early 2D Sonics are primarily known for Green Hill Zone for a reason, because the advertised speed was abandoned in favor of pure platforming, and when speed did exist, it often led to speed traps. Sonic 3 and Knuckles was the most consistent in terms of high points, only improved upon by a completely different fan team 23 years later with Sonic Mania. Sonic Boom 2 and 3 released with no fanfare or acknowledgement whatsoever. Releasing exclusively on the 3DS didn't help. Sonic Rush was actually all about speed. Sonic Rush Adventure introduced sailing and grinding levels for sailing materials, and Sonic Colors established unique wisp mechanics that only declined in design and significance in future titles. Speaking of declining, the latest rendition is the painfully mediocre Sonic Forces, which is especially embarrassing when compared against Sonic Project Hero, a fan project already looking better mechanically than all official 3D Sonic games combined. It really is quite amazing how Sonic has managed to stay alive for almost 30 years due solely to Sonic's design, and it's also incredible how Sonic fans are willing to admit that they're frustrated by the utter lack of quality and care, yet they keep throwing money at the games. That's the entertainment industry for you. So I can't help but wonder why Sonic Generations is often held in high regard. Yes, the 3D level design offers alternate paths, but it's still so fundamentally different from Sonic Adventure that we make a distinction, calling titles like Sonic Generations Modern Sonic. By attempting to streamline Sonic via boosting, perhaps we're missing the more varied and less restrictive and railroaded side of Sonic. There are a myriad of issues with generations as well. Boosting can be pretty mindless during set pieces. Thankfully, boosting is broken up frequently, but even then, boosting often leads to an expectation of unreasonably fast reaction times for obstacles, secrets, or alternate paths, and the camera sometimes doesn't help. So boosting can be used more sparingly as more of an initial acceleration tool, essentially obtaining max speed instantly to skip the slow acceleration, and then disengaging the boost to have control over jumping, homing attacks, or other actions. Yet, even boosting with the short burst method is still unreliable. When jumping, platforming, or otherwise coming to a halt, having a reliable method of re-attaining speed after a mistake or an obstacle, or maintaining speed whilst platforming, could go a long way, especially when Sonic's natural acceleration is so slow. Replacing the boost with a dedicated and refined acceleration burst that can smoothly combo into jumps and homing attacks is what this game is missing. With these fundamental design flaws in mind, does Generations only appear better because there are so few competent 3D Sonic games to really compare it against? Why was Sonic Generations never used as a guide or reference for future projects? Why did future 3D Sonic games regress instead of build upon its past successes? Sonic Generations' entire premise is to celebrate Sonic's 20-year historical significance. But did you really need to jam in an uninspired Sonic 06 level intended to trigger PTSD? Where's Elise? Hello, Sonic's lover? Sonic's first kiss? Smooch Smooch? Mephiles as Shadow's true faker? Alternatively, a self-aware Sonic team including a purposefully broken and glitchy level as an ode to Sonic 06 would have been highly respectable and regarded, and would have introduced more variety and distinctiveness into the mix. Or at the very least, it'd be funny, and that's what I look for in a Sonic game these days. Why don't we have any 3D Sonic games more dedicated to other characters, like Blaze, Tails, or Amy? It's unfortunate that the closest game we have to a dedicated Blaze game besides Sonic Rush, which is still shared with Sonic, is Freedom Planet.
Everything's working great! All systems go, full speed ahead! Uh-oh, what's this? No! Ah! I'm out of control! Mayday! Mayday! Going down! Ah! Look out below!
Consider your sticks bundled and framed. Thanks for joining this new brief design and rumination series that will allow more videos on an assortment of different games in a shorter time frame. Games that I can't release videos for otherwise. Please follow the Patreon link in the description if you're wanting to support this channel. Join me on Last Life, a video game community including other content creators. The Last Life Discord is on the forums. Twitter is my social media of choice, and you're my favorite person, you special boy or girl.